And last but definitely not least this morning, we have Peter Oborne. Peter has asked me to introduce him purely as the political columnist at the Daily Mail, and to say he's going to be discussing the democratic case for leaving the European Union. But I think we all know he's much bigger than that very brief introduction. Peter, thank you.
Oh my God, Leah. They chose the wrong man, didn't they? The Labour Party, if only Corbyn had an ounce of your passion when it comes to talking about anything, but actually, in particular, in the European Union. Actually, he's against the European Union, isn't he? We understand. He just is unable to articulate this democratic set of beliefs on account of his ghastly colleagues, in particular Hilary Benn, son of somebody who's rather good on the subject of the European Union. Actually brilliant. That quote from Tony Benn is in the 70s is just so relevant and so far-sighted that you had here a British cabinet minister who could go to Strasbourg and see that it wasn't democratic. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about as best I can in the next 5 minutes, is democracy and the European Union, because there are all kinds of arguments and issues around the forthcoming referendum debate, but I think the most sort of long-lasting will be, because other issues will come and go, will be democracy, which it's increasingly unfashionable to be democratic and believe in parliamentary democracy. You will notice. You will notice that one of the key pro-European arguments is that actually the sovereignty or democracy doesn't really exist anymore. It's something you share. It's something which is it's rather sort of old-fashioned and absurd and quaint even to believe in British democracy, because that isn't the way the world is anymore. And the world now, if you look at if you unpack that, what it really means is that the large corporations, the foreign bureaucracies, United States of America, all kinds of organisations and countries have a claim on what it is to be British, and they make decisions which never go near a voter. And what I really want to do is to look at the consequences of that actually when you as a voter go and vote at a general election, you're not really voting on much, because most of the big decisions have already been made. The decisions which are going to affect your life have already happened, and in any case are irrelevant to the debates, and nothing's going to... And that's very, very frightening, because if you can't, in a general election, change a government, you can't change a policy, you can't throw out the people who make the rules that govern your country. Eventually that leads to disenchantment with democracy. And indeed we're seeing this over Europe. It's quite very important to note that we're in a very dynamic process in Europe where the voters are no longer responsible to government for choosing governments, and governments are no longer answerable to voters. So we're having a series of coups d'etat across, soft coups d'etat, not military coups d'etat, but coups d'etat nevertheless, where central banks and the European Commission are choosing the governments of certain countries, southern European countries, or even if when the voters choose their governments, the policies are being inflicted on them by the European Commission and by the ECB, and with the help of the IMF sometimes. And this causes despair, because it turns ordinary people into simply passive victims of decisions made elsewhere, not in their own country. I went to Greece about 18 months ago, and I stood outside. I just went to one of the hospitals in Athens and just talked all afternoon to the people there. And they have just become passive. I asked a man who used to run his own business, and he'd folded, he was taking his elderly mother to the hospital. He'd had to bribe the hospital to give her the arranged operation. And I said, what happens in Duke? And he said, the only thing that's going to happen is violence. So eventually we are going to go to violence. Now, that's what happens if you don't have democracy. And one of the reasons, if you look at the long history of Britain, we had a civil war in the 1640s. But generally speaking, we've resolved our problems without, it's incredible achievement actually, for the last 350 years. We've resolved our problems without violence, by and large. And that's an amazing thing, and it's because people have been able to express what they feel, change governments, change society through democratic means, through Parliament. And the reason why we should, the real reason to be concerned about the European Union is that it seeks to abolish national parliaments, turn them into local councils. It's a very explicit aim which it has, and this is, again, this is unbelievably dangerous, because unless you do have a single democratic polity all the way across the 28 countries, from the Urals to the Mediterranean, and you're going to have a situation where the centre is irrelevant to the voters. And when we go to vote in general elections, we vote for a government which we can overthrow. But if you can't do that, it's going to be, as Leo was saying, an imperialist mission. In this case, I think it has to be said, a German. I don't mean that they are imperialists in that way, but it is there for the benefit of Germany. It enables, one of the effects, I don't know, it has been that it is very cheap to buy a Mercedes car also in Greece. And it's very cheap even for big countries outside the European Union to buy Mercedes cars, because the euro is dragged down so much by the presence of failing economies. But the problem with that, of course, is that it's very, very expensive to manufacture in Greece or in southern Europe. Prohibitively expensive. These have been de-industrialized. Greece, Italy, Spain are being, as we speak, de-industrialized, turned back into subsistence or peasant economies, and becoming increasingly lawless as a result, and losing any sense of civic pride or economic sustainability. And that is a catastrophe for the countries concerned. It's brilliant, of course, for Germany, because it exports. It's much, much cheaper to export. Now, to return to the anti-democratic project. So, Patrick O'Flynn, it's very nice of Patrick to arrange this, but let's face it, virtually none of the voters who put him into power, I shouldn't say that, who gave him his position, whatever that may be in the European Parliament, haven't the faintest idea who he is. And more than that, a tiny number of the people who put him there actually voted. I mean, he represents large numbers of people who are absolutely clueless about what he does or who he is. Now, that's terrible. What a message that sends. Just that thing just sends. We should know who our elected representative is, generally speaking, so that we can kick him all out. And that is the first thing. It's debased the European Parliament has debased the notion of voting. It's turned voting into a meaningless act. All the more so when even voting for the local MP who in our constituency which goes to Parliament, again, it's increasingly a meaningless act. And the decisions made are not ones we can really sustainably, rather the way that we live, the big decisions we generate and carry out our lives are not made by us anymore. And that's why I think this is a great issue which will endure. And why I'm minded to vote no, I've continued to follow the arguments, is that we are voting away the basis for our maintaining a civilized, democratic society in this country. And so, and these issues are not discussed or understood enough. But they are grave issues, and why we should thank UKIP for ensuring that a referendum is taking place.